Good afternoon and welcome to Houston Techfest 2020, the virtual edition. Before we start, I want to make you aware of a feature in the presentation that will make the session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which will allow you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our presenter at the appropriate time. So please feel free to post any time during the session. We are also excited to let you know that CodeMag will be giving everyone a free subscription. Houston Techfest will email everyone a link after the event. We are proud to present Philip Wheat of Singularity Innovations, who will be sharing Let's Talk about conversational interfaces. Philip, take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank everybody at Techfest for once again bringing you all this great content. I speak of those outside the presentation. I'm just going to do what I normally do. Those of you who have seen my talks before, this will be about the same, just a little bit less interactive. So just kind of prepare you. I've got a little bit about concepts to begin with. Then we're going to actually do a little bit of Q&A at the end of that, and then I'll go into implementation details, and then we'll do the wrap up. So just to kind of balance out here what we're looking at. And I'm also looking at a little bit of a bandwidth challenge. So I'm going to kill my video, and most of it's going to be the slides and code when we get to that. So I'm going to move there and get ready to go into the talk. Well, conversational interfaces are something that's been around for quite a while. Those of you who have been around as long as I have probably recognize our good friend Hal and his, we talk about it as AI, but when you really think about it, it was a conversational interface. You'd have Hal discussing things, bringing up information, and the crew being able to work with him to be able to get that in place. It wasn't the typical what you saw in Alien with the movies of Mother, which is a keyboard interface. It was basically a discussion back and forth as if the computer was part of the crew itself. More recently, we've seen things such as the movie Her, in which case the actress Scarlett Johansson playing the computer was never even seen in the movie. It was basically all about the conversation that was going on with somebody that wasn't there. The earbud was the interface in which you were talking back and forth through there. That being said, we're looking at all of this, and then let's go to the kind of earliest that I can remember conversational interface, which is Joshua. And in this, we actually got a mix of the keyboard interface and the voice synthesis interface, but it really became that feel of I'm not doing a command and then your response back, but a talk back and forth between a person and a synthetic other person. And that's really what we're talking about with conversational interfaces. We're not talking about, excuse me one moment while I unplug this. I'm plugging my assistant so I can actually say some comments here. Hey, Google, turn the lights on. That's not really a conversational interface. That's a command response. And we're going to talk about that and go through all of that. And I threw this one in here just as my first conversational interface, which was an old teletype. The examples I was going to put together, and I didn't have time for the talk, was exactly what I used this teletype for, which was an old game called Hammurabi. Some of the old gray hairs like myself may remember that. Newer people probably don't remember that anymore, but that really was the first discussion back and forth. You talk to the computer talks back to you, and you work problems and work solutions. So you can see conversational interfaces, whereas everyone's talking about it as something new today. It's really been around really before most of our other interfaces have been in place. It's been there since you didn't even have a screen. So that's kind of the basic piece in there. And I'm going to be going through the what, where, why, when, who, all that kind of stuff. But let's kind of discuss that. It's that two-way interaction that really makes the difference. It's not the command response, but it is you provide some level of interaction. You decide, ask a question, have a response, but that response may spawn off other responses and go on and on and on. You can actually, again, I talked Hammurabi. One of my examples that I'll put when we get to the implementation side is the old dungeon game, or with more later known as Zork, which is an entire world of games that happened for a long time that had that conversational interface. It was a very simple conversational interface, but it was that I ask a question or I talk about something, I get the information back on the state of what happened. It goes through and you go back and forth and you look at how a world works with that. Today, we're looking at things with chatbots. Companies are very interested in this because it is a way to automate the ability to for people to figure out what they actually need or find any information they need and be able to refine that and work with it in all the different ways. Note this is normally human initiated. I will call a company, I will ask my assistant here some information that I need to know. I will try and figure out what's happening there. I will give a command and maybe get back this couldn't happen, but here are some options. Those kind of pieces that are happening there. Probably as we go through this, we're talking about a two-party, myself and the computer that I'm talking with or working with. There is an extension of this where 3 or more parties are working on a problem or are doing the discussion, and that's a very interesting problem. I don't know anybody that's doing it well, so I'm not going to really go into that in depth, but that's something where we're actually working on things that I think are going to get very interesting. The challenge there is the one-on-one interaction tends to be in a certain manner. If you think about when you're sitting with a person and talking one-on-one, and then when you go versus when you're, say, in a meeting with 5 or 10 or 12 people, and how the dynamics really change in that. And right now we're really working on that one-on-one and getting that down. Once we really get that in a good natural pattern, then you'll probably start seeing people looking more at that joining into a group discussion kind of thing. And the human initiated, again, this is because of normally the way taking advantage of interactions happens because so many computer interactions in this manner have advertisement, or often it's really meant to push information rather than pull for if it's not human initiated. Who gets to choose what's pushed is a very big concern for non-human initiated. You'll actually see it again as we go to the implementations. We're starting to move to where there are enough controls that having your system start the conversation is starting to be an option with several of the implementations. That being said, there's a lot of concern about having advertising or when it should be, so that we don't get in the situation we did with email, which is you have to have multiple levels of spam filters and junk filters and focus views in order to get rid of all the things that people want you to pay attention to that you don't want to, especially when we talk about some of the reasons why we want this type of interface. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And the other piece I was going to say is I'm talking mostly about their voice here, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of these rules that we're talking about with conversational interfaces can be applied. If you look at certain ways or certain designs that can be done with web applications or with mobile applications, that conversational interface can work that way. However, you really do kind of have to think about how it is, because the back button really isn't something you want to worry about with conversational interface. It's not really built for that. You don't, well, yeah, while every once in a while you may do in a discussion. Let's step back take a couple of steps back. You may do that every once in a while. That's not really normal. That's not really how you do things. It's notable in that it's something exceptional, not something that really happens most of the time. And again, for the slide here, the chat bots are what you'll hear about a lot with implementations of these conversational interfaces back and forth. And again, part of that is proper. Part of chatbots are just command and response. It gets fairly fuzzy between the two. So why are we really interested in this? I mean, beyond the serious cybernetics corporation's view that we need to have our plastic pal who's fun to be with. Beyond us all being kind of isolated right now and needing somebody to talk to. Why are we actually really looking at this as long term? One of the reasons is our devices are becoming ever present. Our ability to interact with computers is no longer limited to the WIMP interface, Windows icons, mouse, pointer. We've got our mobile device, we've got our touch devices. But even more, we're getting, and my friends here may join in on the discussion. I apologize. But part of what we're talking about here is making the conversation or making the interaction a lot more familiar to what humans normally do. This may even mean handwriting, hand gestures, all of these types of interactions go into a conversational interface. One of the other pieces is when we're doing those traditional, your mobile screen, I look down to look at it at a notification. I have to stop and look at my computer screen to see what the status of things are. Those are very interruption driven. They're distracting. They're pulling us off of whatever we're likely working on if we're not working on something specifically related to the computer. And there are things such as, you know, I view my computer as my external brain. There are lots of things I've got there that relate to whatever I'm doing in the physical world, but going to look it up or going to find those things may be very distracting if I'm soldering or if I'm working with assembling a device or those kind of things. So being able to go for these conversation interfaces to be able to make things work, pull the digital into the physical and describe the physical to the digital and move back and forth becomes very, very useful. There's also the concept of the screens. If we're talking about mobile, everybody goes, well, I've just got my phone, I'll just look it up or I'll do whatever on my phone. The screens there are either small or limited. Yeah, the larger the screen, the more you've got to worry about, does it fit in your pocket or does it fit in your wallet or wherever it goes? Or they're very large and vulnerable and distracting. If you've got, say, an iPad or a Kindle or something with a 10-inch screen, the larger it is, the more likely it is to be broken. The more distracting it is if you're not directly looking at it, that things will pop up and pull you away. So being able to kind of move that out of the sight for just a screen to more of an audio interface may be more useful for the task that you're doing. Again, movies are wonderful for examples of this. Everybody wants their Jarvis that they can be working on something and just ask what's going on and have a conversation back and forth. Hey, you know, when's lunch? Oh, the delivery guy is delayed and whatever. Now, by the way, they were out of so-and-so, do you want something else? All of those kind of things is what we're looking at, so that people can do what they do best, which is kind of the multitasking or working on something without being interrupted and while getting information and then move it back off. This can allow you to be a lot more focused on what you're doing. And I say good or bad, depending on who you are. This is where who controls the other side of the conversation from you becomes very important. One of the things we're looking at is because most of these chatbots or assistant interfaces are hosted by someone else, that means they get control over what priorities are there or not. You may get some say into it, but ultimately, if it's their system, it's their control. So if you can actually tie that in for something that you want to really be focused on, to really kind of drive exactly what you want, that's good for you. That may be bad for them guiding you to more of their where they want you to be. So depending upon how this works and how all of this gets configured, this is probably the big challenge right now with working on conversational interfaces. So you don't, how do you actually have something that's useful for you and is useful enough with enough processing power without needing to have a sponsored message show up every so often, or somebody being able to bring their solutions up higher in your suggestions than maybe something you would prefer. But and the reason for that is, our last bullet point here is, it really is something that hopefully can help you guide your questions to find out exactly what you need or want. And this is where it needs to be a trusted system, so that you can know that it's actually working in your interest rather than others. Because if it's going to suggest always suggest something that is maybe not what you wanted, but better for whoever hosts the service, you're not going to use it that much. So being able to actually work into that becomes important. That being said, it also becomes an interesting situation. One of the examples I'm going to show is the time-honored ELIZA program, which has been used for psychoanalysis. You actually see this with a lot of telemedicine coming in with these kind of things. How does privacy work with this? How does all of this tie in? And these are all things we're concerned about with other interfaces. But with conversational interfaces, the challenge becomes making sure people remember that they're talking with a system that has privacy rules, that has the EULAs that may not be as friendly as they think it is. Again, this is kind of social pieces that we're working through, but if a screen's not there, or if you're thinking there's a person on the other end, if it gets that good, how do we make sure to remind people that no, this may not be in your best interest to ask about certain things or to give certain data to the system? So who is the target audience? We're kind of talking about what's going on here. Who is it? Really, this is one of those pieces where we talk about mobile for younger audiences. We talk about TV for certain generations. If you're as old as I am, the mouse and keyboard is going to continue to be what I'm most comfortable with, because that's really what I've done so much with. But with conversational interfaces, really this is something that we're used to far before we actually start working with computers. We've had conversations with other people. So this means that even if you're used to a certain visual interface, the conversational interface, be it as a visual medium or as a voice text-to-speech response, or as a keyboard teletype experience, all of those pieces really do tie in, really do kind of come back to, we're used to having conversations back and forth with other people. So it becomes a lot more natural, feels a lot more personable to be able to work with that, even if you're used to this, being able to talk to someone on FaceTime or Duo or whatever it may be, WhatsApp. Having the computer be able to take that other side really does feel natural for people. That also being said, auto translation services are getting better. This is one of those situations where using a conversational interface all of a sudden may actually be more valuable than a traditional interface, because at this point we can actually start pulling in the information from not just traditional data sources, but actually be able to bridge some of the boundaries to other data repositories and be able to translate it into something that I can work with. For example, my wife likes anime. There's some interesting things there, and then there's things that can be subtitled or that can actually, they're only in the native Japan. But if we're talking about a conversational interface, now a lot of that metadata, a lot of that information about something that may not be native English would be something that would now be able to surface to me. Whereas in a text interface, because it's less processed, I might not be able to get as much information, or it may not be as relevant to me as with a conversational interface where I can drill down or get more information about certain pieces, or maybe get more context around certain items in that subject that I'm interested in. And then the ability to adjust the interface, be able to have, at this point, you're all, with the conversation, you're able to take different tones. And I did not put this as a link, but I'll actually add this when we push it up. There is an absolutely beautiful special that was done by Douglas Adams for the BBC called Hyperland. I strongly recommend that you watch that. It's available on many places. I know it's available on YouTube, but probably a lot of other streaming services. I highly recommend you looking at that for not just the data going out, not just the pre-processing, but the ability to adapt to mood, adapt to how the personal style happens. Whereas if I'm going to a web page and I can choose dark mode or light mode and maybe move some things around. With conversational interfaces, because that interaction is moving back and forth, the interface actually is able to tweak or change how it's providing responses, maybe depending upon I'm tired or I'm very frustrated and therefore I'm short. I want things very quick and very don't bother me with details. Just give me what I want and get me there. Maybe I'm bored and therefore offering up more options or more things that I might not be thinking about is something that's interesting to me. That's really going to be a huge area that's going to happen in the future of being able to take those interfaces and adapt to not just who's using it, but what frame of mind that user may be in at the time they're using the interface. And I mentioned the Hyperland because the wonderful Tom Baker is the agent that is communicating from the computer with the conversational interface with Douglas Adams. And at one point, there is a configuration option about what attitude the agent has. Is he obsequious or is he New York or whatever? And being able to change that and be able to work with that really it has a lot of potential to help people be both more comfortable and to get what they need in the way they want to. And then, of course, we're talking about users, but you see a lot of companies and organizations that are also very interested in this, because instead of the traditional voicemail of press 1 to press 2 to, or here's a fact, please enter a deal and let me try and find just a piece of text that gives you what we think you want. Being able to start getting into that chatbot area of what are you interested in, what have you had, can I find out if you're very frustrated or not? Is this high priority or is this something you're just interested in? And be able to actually send that conversation the direct path to really help you get what you need or solve your problem or help you find something that the company can offer better. That offers a lot of potential for companies to move from send you to a call center, which the person there has a script and really isn't much better than a programmed conversation, a text-to-speech reading of conversation, unfortunately, to one where what they learn about their customers or what they learn about contacts can be fed back in to make things work much better for the user or for whoever's doing the question for them. And then when will you likely to be use this? Like to be able to use this? Normally you're looking at this, I call out transportation first of all, because this is really recently where I kind of got into this, is working with some of the auto manufacturers. If you think about buying a car today, it's very rare today not to have on the steering wheel a button for an assistant. Automakers are putting it inside their vehicles, but they tend to be not as good as what the tech companies are doing. So you'll see almost all cars these days have either Android Auto or CarPlay or both, and you're actually going to see these things continue to evolve, primarily because, and again, with the transportation, with the auto manufacturers, I've worked with them doing things like driver awareness research vehicle. What's going on, and how do we keep the driver's attention on the road? Still, our best driver is the person behind the wheel, for good or bad. I'll leave the comments about how well our autonomous driving is doing off the table there. For the moment, you still want the person involved with it. So how do we actually make sure that the driver's not going to be distracted by something? That's by having that conversational interface. I'd like to do this. Well, here's some of your options on there. Well, you know, find me new music. Where's the nearest food? Oh, what kind of restaurants are around? All of those kind of things are what you're looking at with transportation. Be able to find that information. The hands-on work. You're actually seeing this happen a lot with augmented reality starting to work heavy, being able to do things such as do assistance when you have people out in the field doing maintenance. Here's some things you need to do. Here's your checklist. This part, do we have this part in stock? All of these kind of things is something you normally don't think about. But again, kind of back to that Tony Stark and Jarvis. You know, I'm working on this. Is the part in the warehouse? Do I have it on my truck? Now you're actually being able to give additional support to someone who may be in a non-traditional office desk environment that's really useful and that's really handy, that really makes productivity happen better. And then there's the whole brainstorming ideation. I think about this from an old story about John Boyd, the Mad Colonel. If you don't know about him, I would absolutely say do some reading up on him and some of his revolutionary ideas. But one of the things he really needed was he had to bounce ideas off. He had to work through it. He worked with talking to people, and he talked through it, talking to someone and hearing them ask questions back. Being able to do something like that with a conversational interface that could go through and check your ideas, figure out what you've missed, what's relevant, maybe give suggestions. All of those kind of things would be very valuable for an idea worker, especially if you're looking at a situation where maybe you work on a field where it's hard to find another expert. Maybe you work on something that's fairly proprietary. You don't want to bounce off. Maybe you just want to double check it before you put to a human. You'd like to make sure everything's solid before you actually show it to someone. These are the kind of things that might be very useful for a conversational interface, that you really have kind of a coworker that may or may not actually be a person working through there. Again, it's less likely in social situations for the near term, primarily because of that 3+ person interaction, and also because if you're having more and more people, you run into issues with actually figuring out who's talking, identification. The challenges there become a lot larger. It's not that they're not going to happen, but you're going to see those in more limited situations for quite some time until we get a lot of the rest of the information put together. And a lot of our, to be honest with you, until some of our social norms start changing. And you think about this, actually, the social norms, I'll mention that real quickly. You think about things such as parents looking at their kids saying thank you to Alexa and Google. How do we create these norms around things that aren't human, but maybe we're interacting as a human? Are they, should they be treated like we would want people to be treated or not? How do they, should they be not treated as humans so we don't forget that they're not? All of these kind of things are some social pieces we're going to be talking about, or be looking at there. And then how do we provide this type of interface? I'm assuming that if you're on this talk, you're some type of technical. So you're going to be not just working with this, but you're going to actually be trying to provide that functionality that's going on in here. And the smart speakers are leading the way. I had to unplug mine as I talk because I've got an Alexa and a Google Assistant here, or whatever they're branding them now, the Google Mini. And I have to be careful when I give presentations that they don't start chatting to me. I've actually worked with a number of custom built ones as well, but these are things that really don't have a visual interface, and they're coming into play. We're seeing this as you start seeing even TVs are starting to have voice interfaces. We're having things that are mixed with screens and voice. Your mobile device, all of them these days seems to have some type of assistant, and some have more than one. And we get into some battles there, but those are coming into play. But the idea is that the smart environments are where we want to end up being, with you being able to have an interaction wherever you are, with that same context that you would have with working on the phone that you own, or the speaker that you own and you've configured for. Being able to move that around and have that context that it knows who you are and where you are, and put all of that together. So those are the kind of things we're looking at, that behind the scenes we're going to be having to look at. How do we do voice identification? What do we need to do with say some of the proprietary data, and how does that move around? How do we give access to it? How do we give the permissions? Yes, you can actually identify that I'm in the garage, or maybe I'm in a store, but I give permission that my assistant can listen to me there and give me help, rather than just on my phone, which may be in my pocket. So these are all things that we're going to have to look at, is to how we actually do permissions, how we actually go from just the speakers themselves. Again, my Google Assistant does identification. If I'm talking to it or my wife's talking to it, it actually tries to do some identification back and forth and figure out what's going on in that context. How do we actually spread that out and give permissions without getting super 1984, everything watching, Big Brother is doing everything? There's got to be some balance in there where we're going to have to figure out. So that's kind of the overview of what we're talking about with conversational interfaces. I'm going to pause here for just a second to see if we have any questions. I'm not sure if we do or not. Just a second. Let me see if I can get to the list. I may not be able to.
There are no questions at the moment.
No questions at the moment? Okay, so I will move on. So it looks like we're gonna probably run a little bit fast, but that's not unexpected. So we've kind of talked about what we're looking at. Unfortunately, what we're dealing with today is that there are a lot of first mover advantages and a lot of coalescing around specific platforms. I really would like to see more options here, but that doesn't seem to be happening immediately. I mentioned specifically, say, the vehicle manufacturers are each trying to do some of their own, but you're really not seeing that level of functionality that you do with the area leaders here. And really the top two right now are Google and Amazon, Google with their assistant and Amazon with Alexa. I'm sure there are some people who would actually flip the next two and say Apple Siri, since it is the most popular. That being said, most of what we see is that it also doesn't have quite the richness that you would hope for, or that Alexa and Assistant really kind of put into place. Microsoft Cortana is kind of doing a bit of pivot right now. with trying to move more into data mining and data analytics. As we've seen, not having a foothold in kind of the consumer market has really forced them to take a look and see what they needed to do. And right now, most of the work they're doing seems to be on tying in with enterprise data lakes. Later on, we may see this as actually a very interesting and powerful solution, but for right now, it's probably not going to be something that's going to tie into consumer products. At a later point, we'll probably see something really interesting happening here, but not today. And then the custom solutions. And I have a link here to a SparkFun product, which is actually going through giving you a lot of the capabilities of doing the speech recognition on a chip plus text-to-speech. When these things happen, though, you do tend to have to do a lot of work yourself. The speech recognition and text-to-speech are hard problems, but they're generally solved today. They're not completely solved, but they're generally solved. So what you're looking at today is doing the smarts of what do I do with this? How do I actually manage the context of what's happening? How do I actually follow this through, gather the right information, have the right details about what the user's doing, all of those kind of places, which is a lot of work for a custom solution. But you can see some of this in play. I just don't really expect to see a lot of very general purpose custom solutions. If you see them, they're probably going to be fairly specific and limited in what's going on there. And then the key piece of, okay, I've got an Alexa or Alexa skill, or I've got a Google Home app, or I've got a whatever the plugin for Siri is. How do I what do I do with that? And most of that actually ties back into needing to be able to process something and putting your own logic into play. Some of these actually do have, and again, I've worked with Google Assistant for more than most, and with that, there are the ability to put a lot of configuration options inside to do paths. But when you're working with that, you're really kind of putting scripts in play. Those are not super in depth. Those are not something that you're really going to get a lot of complexity or pull data into. If you're looking for something that's really going to give a richer environment, you're going to need something to host it. Maybe and maybe you'll use a virtual machine to host your processing and the rest of those. But what I've seen mostly right here are things such as the Azure functions, the AWS Lambdas, the Google Cloud functions, things that sit around and wait while other things handle the initial processing, but then the queries come in and look at what's going on and go, hey, I've gotten this question, I've gotten this context around it, we've come to this point. Now I need to get information based off of that to choose maybe what step next to go to in this conversation, to send data back and give them additional options, to put that business logic in there to be able to put all that into place. And this is where you put those into play. And at the end here, I'm going to actually show you and give you a link to where I've got written a Google function to do some of this for the Google Assistant. So you'll be able to kind of see how to start putting this into play and how to put these into your own functionality. Anything that's going on with the Azure functions can be done with these others. You just have to work with how the hosting, how the pricing, and all the rest of that happens for you. And here we go. Some code to get you started. I've got some links here. For the GitHub, the first one here is that Zork that I mentioned. It's written in JavaScript. I can pull it up here in just a second, but basically it goes through and does that discussion. Hit thief with sword. You're in a maze of twisty passages all alike. Turn on lantern. Those kind of things, to be able to start doing that interaction with a world. It's a very nice way to do that with Google Home, to be able to move from that original text infocom type interaction to more of a worldview, being able to bring that into your day-to-day world. SciSharp has a nice little bot I'm a C# guy, so I look at that to be able to go through and make some of those chat bots. This one specifically can be used for things such as a way I communicate these days is Teams and Discord, being able to tie bots into those to be able to go look up things and to work with that. It's a text interface, but being able to bring that information in to be able to do analysis and work with that, being able to have something that does that for you, to be able to do that interaction, so you can just say, if it's this type of interface, bring that in or do whatever. And then I've got a link here to a public Git repository for the assistant example that I've actually got code up there that I'm going to pull up here in just a second and be able to show you what we've got for that interaction. Let me see if I can flip over and change my, let me see if I can do my change to, there we go. And hopefully this has popped up with my code here. This is part of what you'll get in the repository, and it's just basically the Google Assistant. And what you're looking at here is working with some of the samples, and I've basically got a back and forth type of discussion here where you can ask about information. This is specifically something about a library in Dallas. And you can see we've got some just very basic information across here. And it was, I've kind of worked this up from another example that I had found, which was, here are some pieces of information I might want to know about. Then you actually go to you can actually use the Google Assistant once you've activated this ability, and then you can go and ask about different pieces of information, and I can send that information back. What's the name of it? What's the address? What's the hour? What's the current date and time? This is already there, but it's also starting to pull in some of the information that's going in there. What else is coming into place? Because you can actually see we're getting what query actually brought us here. Google is actually handling a lot of that itself, but then you're actually coming into place to go, if it's asking the name, if this is actually going through and saying this interaction got to this point. So it's not just did they ask for a name, but did it come through some of the pre-processing that brought that into play. I can actually go for that, or I can actually go specifically, is this the text they're looking for? So you come in to work with those kind of things. So you can see all of a sudden you can use a lot of external services to lead up to this, but inject your own logic in here to start putting things into play, to start working with it. And in the README, I'll have some of the information about how you actually put the configuration to get to this point so that you can actually have this called from Google and have your own piece in here. You can actually set some of these up as private for beta, and some you actually push out. I've got a table store here to do a lot of the logging, but then you can actually go through and not just do that, but save the queries, save a history of what's going on, save the identity of the person who's doing it. So you can start putting things in to be richer, to actually go, hey, you haven't asked, I could come in and say, ask about something and trigger it, say, hey, you haven't asked me anything in a while. Is there something I can look for? Is there something I need to get? Or is there something I can do better? And start capturing that to push it to the users as well. One of the things I have on another example, and I will try and remember to put that in here, is what are the headlines? And be able to go through and read me headlines off of things. There are some pieces that you look with these, such as Google limits standard responses to about 20 seconds. So you don't want to actually read the entire web page, but you could do that with certain configurations. So being able to go through and let me know that something's happening on my Teams channel. Hey, there's an alert if I'm driving is one of the things that I really started this with. So having a personal assistant to put all this in place is what I always like to do, because what I like is what I tend to work on. But it's one of those things that it doesn't take a lot to look at this and start thinking, well, if this would be useful for me, would this be useful for someone else, or can I tweak it just a little bit and then have it useful for more than just me, or can I add configuration, or can I host it for lots of people to actually do coordination? We live in a world of APIs. How many things can I hook into this to give my view on things rather than maybe something I want to do with their skill or their application, or maybe how do I tie things across at a higher level? So all of that in play. This is up. You'll see on the slideshow on the slides where we are with the link here, and let me see if I can pop back over to my presentation, and I think we're just about there. I believe I probably messed up my presentation, but we're right here at the end. So we're basically at the Q&A where it looks like we're going to be about 10 minutes early. I apologize for running a bit quick. Do we have any questions, or are we?
There are presently no questions.
All right. Well, that's about what I have. Unfortunately, I'm used to being a little more interactive, and I put a little time in here for some questions. If you have any questions on this or follow up, probably for this one specifically on the Houston Tech Fest assistant example, send me some messages on that one, so I'll have some context about what's going on here. Or generally, Michael's got some information on how to get to me. You can always email me at phil@singularityinnovations.com, and I'll answer there as well. So with that, since there are no questions, I'll go ahead and wrap up, but hope it was at least useful and got you thinking about some different ways that you can actually work with your systems.
Okay. I want to thank you all for attending today's session, and Philip, thank you for sharing. The recording of this session will be available at HoustonTechFest.com soon. We hope you enjoy the rest of virtual Houston Tech Fest. Have a nice day. We are clear.